Let's talk about some misconceptions in the furry fandom. I had to put this picture in here. It kind of made me giggle. So, let's address some of these misconceptions. We already kind of talked about this one, the idea that furries are fursuiters. Wrong, right? Anytime someone says furries are just people who put on fuzzy animal costumes, that's a misconception. Most furries do not have a fuzzy animal costume, they don't have a mascot costume, they don't have a fursuit. That's 28% approximately, right? That would be like saying Star Wars fans are people who wear Stormtrooper armor. That's not what most Star Wars fans do. Bronies. We can talk about furries as bronies. Are furries all people who like My Little Pony fandom? Where do you draw the line between furries and bronies? Is there a line between them? And we can talk about therians as well. Right? We'll talk about these last two in particular for a second. There is some overlap between the furry and brony fandom. For many of you who are new to this fandom, you might not remember about 6 to 7 years ago when My Little Pony first came out. This was a kind of a divisive issue in the fandom. Some of our early research suggested that up to 1/3 of furries wanted My Little Pony out of this fandom. Get it out of here, I don't want it in my fandom. You don't see that anymore. It's relaxed quite a bit. I would argue, by the way, I like that picture. I would argue, by the way, that this is kind of counterproductive when you consider that between 15 and 25% of furries identifies as a brony, depending on which of our surveys you use. So you're kind of shooting like 1/8 to 1/4 of the fandom in the foot when you draw these kinds of lines and say that doesn't count as furry, that doesn't belong in my fandom, right? Also, when you study bronies, which we do, we're publishing a book on bronies this summer, by the way, about 20% of them call themselves furries as well. So again, saying you don't count as part of our fandom, well, you're throwing away perfectly good furries, right? Don't do that. But this is my furry brony overlap, by the way, Flufflepuff. That's the character's name. And what's even more interesting and more relevant is that for those of you in the know, the My Little Pony television show is coming to an end. This is its last season. Sorry to traumatize all the bronies in the room. Pardon? Starts next week, the last season. Yeah, and so with the My Little Pony fans potentially ending, or at least sort of ramping down, their biggest convention, their equivalent of Anthrocon or MFF, is shutting down. This is their last year. And a lot of these bronies are going to be looking for a refuge, a place where they can go, be around other people who are okay with their show about walking, talking animal characters. I wonder where they're going to turn to. Just a little bit of, for the bronies in the room, just a couple of quick statistics for you. We asked who the most favorite character, the most popular favorite character is, who is best pony. Yes. Obviously Twilight Sparkle, the best pony. Sorry Rarity fans. I take great glee in that. Okay, so I mentioned that I study media violence. You can fight me on this later on, but as it turns out, violent media does in fact raise your risk of aggression. It's not a huge effect, it's a very mild effect, a very moderate effect, but it does. But there's a neat flip side to that as well. Media with pro-social messages can actually lower your risk of aggression, and in fact it can make you more likely to engage in helping behavior. We know this because we studied it in bronies. We've published articles. This is in fact a paper that we've published, and I'm so proud of this paper, not because the science was good, it was, but because of the title of it, which is Letters from Equestria. No, wait, it gets better. I fought tooth and nail so that the very first line of this published scientific article, Dear Princess Celestia, hashtag career goals. There's an actual published scientific article, and what we found, we compared furries to bronies, to other online fan groups. We compared them to, in this case, Rooster Teeth fans of predominantly online popular media culture, and what we found was this neat link where those who watched My Little Pony more actually showed more empathy, and in fact that empathic behavior tended to lead to more charitable behavior. They were more likely to donate blood, they were more likely to donate money to charities. So, to the bronies in the room, I get to use the excuse that I'm watching it for research. You get to use the excuse that it's making you a better person, so you're welcome. Scientists said you can do this. Alright, question. Are furries people who think they're animals? This comes up sometimes, right? People say, well, furries are people who pretend to be animals or imagine that they're walking, talking animal characters. I guess the strictest version of this is, are furries people who can't tell the difference between being human and being animal? Is that something that they are? I want to argue that this is a misconception, despite the fact that sometimes it might seem like furries think they're animals. Let's talk about what this means. Remember, the defining feature of furry is having an interest in media featuring anthropomorphic animal characters, animals that tends to do human-y things, right? So it's not that furries are thinking that they are animals. If anything, they'd be thinking they're walking, talking human characters, but that's not true as well. If you want to talk about a group who thinks of themselves as non-human animals, that would be the Therian fandom, or not fandom, the Therian community is a better way to describe it. These are folks who say that there's something about them, something spiritual, something psychological in their mind that makes them not feel entirely human, right? That's not what makes a person a furry. That would make you more a member of the Therian community. Right? As it turns out, between 7 and 15% of furries would say they fall into this category. Right? There's a fair number of furries who would say, sometimes I don't feel entirely human. Right? I feel like I've got the spirit of an animal. Right? So there's some overlap here. This is the better way to think about it. There are furries who do not call themselves Therians. There are Therians who do not call themselves furries. And there's a small overlapping circle in the middle, about 17 to 15% of folks there, who would say that, yes, I happen to like anthropomorphic animal media, and I do feel like I have something non-human about me. We can see, for example, when we ask these different groups, hey, do you feel not entirely human ever? And what you find is that while 35% of furries say, yeah, sometimes I don't feel entirely human, 86% of Therians say that they feel this with some regularity. So it seems to suggest that, yeah, there's a categorical difference here between these groups. Now, some people have asked us, well, is this just something they're saying for attention? Like, are Therians just trying to make people think that they're weird or unusual? We've tested this. In fact, there's some really clever ways you can test it using what are called reaction time studies, right? And sometimes it's called the IAT, the implicit association test. And we published this article in a journal, a scientific journal, and we looked at patterns of reaction times between Therians and non-Therian furries. And I won't get into all the nitty-gritty, messy details. The gist of it is that when it comes to Therians, they're overlapping. Their concept of me and non-human animals in their mind overlaps. And you can see this in the patterns of reaction times they make. We can measure it in milliseconds, this difference in the way their mind is working. This isn't just something they're saying. Their mind is working and representing me as at least partially overlapping with the concept of non-human animal. That's a really cool application of this measure, right? And we tested it and found it 2 different times. This wasn't a fluke. This is fairly consistent. Right. Are furries deviants? Are furries weirdos? I mean, well, they're a little bit weird in the sense that they're statistically rare. Most people are not furries. Right? Most people do not fall into the category of furry. About 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 10,000 people would call themselves a furry. So statistically, yeah, we're kind of rare. But being statistically rare doesn't mean you're any more likely to be violent. Right? Furries aren't out in the streets causing murder and mayhem. You're no more likely to be maladjusted. You're no more likely to have been diagnosed with any sort of mental illness. We do find that furries are a little bit higher in their prevalence of being on the autism spectrum, but this isn't unique to furries, right? As we talk about in some of our campaigns, our PR campaigns for our research, we mention that, well, one of the defining features of being on the spectrum is having a passionate interest in something. That's kind of what makes you a fan, right? Having a passionate interest in anything. So what we're starting to look into is any fandom, right? Compared to the general population, you're probably going to find more people on the spectrum. So we're testing that hypothesis right now in this next year. So something we're looking into, we certainly don't think it's something unique to the furry fandom. If there's anything that makes the furry fandom unique in this regard, it might be acceptance and openness and a sense of community we build around folks who are on the autism